Switch.
Automatically
Yeah,
just switch.
just switch into English.
Okay.
Thank you.
Latinas no son como las americanas.
Son mejores.
Son mejores, exactamente.
Es un chiste.
Pero me queda muy lejos.
I just want to shove it in there, like.
So they want to.
Show her because being able to see
Okay.
to turn on the mic.
Yes. Because otherwise,
It's
yes,
not
otherwise
going to
the
steady
servants
in
can
there,
hear.
but I can hear.
What is this? So that is up.
This is on.
No se ande.
Bala.
Hello.
This is a test of the English language interpretation. This is a test of the English interpretation system. If you are hearing a female voice on channel 1, you've successfully connected to the English. I'm seeing a signal from our from Tatiana colleague that hello, she is successfully connected. I'm so glad to see and to hear that our colleagues, our fellow interpreters, are able to hear us. Not seeing a lot of other headsets in the room.
I don't think so. I don't hear it.
Hello. We're going to begin our event now. If everybody could take their seat, please. Okay. If everybody could just come in and take a seat, we'll get started. Okay, before we begin, I'm just going to hold these up. Okay, these are here for a reason. This is a language inclusive event. It is not going to be an English dominated or an English focused event. So want to make sure that everybody has an earpiece and the facility to translate. So you move to channel 1, 2, or 3. You can see the languages listed there on the top table. Whichever language you want to listen to, then move to that channel, please. And we'll get started in a moment once I know that everybody has their earpiece ready, and we'll move into the event. Thank you. Okay, just making sure. Can everybody hear me down the back of the room? Great. Okay, everybody, welcome and good afternoon. I know it's a miserable, wet, rainy day out there, but it's very warm and sunny and friendly in here. It's an absolute pleasure to be hosting you all today. My name is Dr. Shirley Graham, and I'm the Director of the Gender Equality Initiative in International Affairs here at George Washington University, Elliott School of International Affairs. I'm delighted that today, during Women's History Month and during the week of International Women's Day, that we are hosting the US State Department's 11 International Women of Courage for 2023. Let me tell you. Let me tell you a little bit about the Gender Equality Initiative before we get into more details about the event. So the Gender Equality Initiative in International Affairs brings together the curriculum, events, and policy outreach with the aim of achieving gender equality globally. We teach 22 courses on gender and international affairs, more than any other school in DC. We're very proud of that. And we have over 400 students taking our courses each year. The study of gender in international affairs is the study of power. Who has it? How is it wielded? Who is being marginalized? And how do organizations and institutions weave together gender inequities into their policies and practices, thereby perpetuating systems of discrimination that lead to conflict, violence, and humanitarian crises? As feminist researchers, we make visible gendered harms, abuses, and violences, and how systems of oppression in the home, the family, and in intimate partner relationships are linked with national and international security and stability. Because countries that are more gender equal and where women have higher status, both in the home and in public life, are less likely to use violence to resolve conflict. Today, we are honoring women human rights defenders everywhere. The women in Iran who have been killed by the regime, such as 22-year-old Jina Mahsa Amini. The women who are imprisoned, the women who are being tortured, the women who are being hounded out of public life, and the women who have been disappeared. As we cast our gaze across the globe, we see women everywhere punished for daring to request their human rights. From the women in Afghanistan, who have been barred from all areas of public life, including second and third level education, to the Indigenous women environmental rights defenders being targeted and killed by armed groups in Colombia, the women journalists and activists in Myanmar being killed by the military, to the politically active women and sexual and gender minorities in Yemen who are being persecuted by the warring parties there. Wherever we look, we see women being threatened, bullied, harassed, and silenced for demanding our rights. In its 2022 report, the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights stated that 60% of the cases of intimidation for cooperation with the UN concerned women, and nearly 1/3 of women representatives of civil society organizations who briefed the Security Council have faced reprisals. And that in the previous year, there were 29 cases of killings of women human rights defenders, journalists, and trade unionists in only 8 conflict-affected countries. And this is believed to be a huge undercount. In his 2022 report on the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda, which is 10 UN Security Council resolutions calling for the inclusion of women in all aspects of peace and security decision-making, the UN Secretary General stated that progress has either stalled or reversed. In fact, UN Women has reported that with the rise of right-wing populism, authoritarian regimes, and the control of women's sexual and reproductive health rights, with abortions now banned in many states in the US, as well as other countries such as Poland and Brazil, it will take another 300 years to close the gender gap if we continue at the current pace of change. So this means that we're handing down to our daughters, granddaughters, nieces, grandnieces, in a world in which it is not safe for them to be women. That's why it's so important that we have events like today. We need to continuously provide platforms for women's voices and women's experiences to be heard, especially of those who are the most marginalized in society. It is through this collective storytelling that we will break the silence and call for change. So, I would now like to introduce you to our speakers for today. But before I do, I would like to thank my co-sponsor for today's event, Dr. Will Yeomans, Director of the Institute for Public Diplomacy and Global Communications, who's a wonderful friend and ally and supporter of the Gender Equality Initiative. Thank you so much, Dr. Yeomans. Now, I would like to introduce you to the three students who will be moderating today's conversation. I am so excited that my students get to have these crucially important public conversations. And we wanted to ensure that today's event was inclusive and to bring in the voices of young women from different regions of the world. First, we have Beatrice Silva, who is a senior at the far end of the table, who is a senior candidate for a BA in International Affairs and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies. There's more. She's the Vice President of the George Washington University chapter of the DC Student Consortium on Women, Peace and Security. And she also serves on the Executive Committee of the US Civil Society Working Group on Women, Peace and Security. Previously, she was a research intern at Emily's List and an education intern at the Inter-American Dialogue. Beatrice is from Brazil. Next, sitting closest to me, is Alka Pont. She is a graduate student undertaking an MA in International Affairs and Global Communications here at George Washington University. After working for more than 7 years in business management in various financial organizations, Citi, Invesco, and Standard Chartered, in both Nepal and India, she is now focusing on becoming an advocate for women's rights and gender equality in international affairs. And Alka is from Nepal. And in the middle, we have Maya Nair. She is a first-year undergraduate student studying international affairs with concentrations in security policy and gender and international affairs. She currently serves as the first-year undergraduate representative for the DC Student Consortium on Women, Peace and Security and volunteers for the Gender Equality Initiative in International Affairs. Maya is an American with Colombian and Indian heritage. You're very welcome, Maya. Our conversation today will be concluded with remarks by Dr. Mary Ellsberg. Where's Dr. Mary Ellsberg? Oh, over here. Okay. Dr. Ellsberg is the founding director of the Global Women's Institute at George Washington University. It is a university-wide institute dedicated to producing policy-oriented research to promote gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. She has more than 30 years of experience in international research and program work on gender and ending violence against women and girls. Dr. Ellsberg's deep connection to global gender issues stems not only from her academic work, but also from living and working in Nicaragua for nearly 20 years in public health and women's rights advocacy. Okay, now let me introduce each, yes, thank you, Mary. Now I'd like to introduce you all to our esteemed guests from 3 women from the 11 Women of Courage 2023, and all the other women are here joining us today. It is such a thrill to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us in this important conversation. Thank you. First of all, I would like to introduce you to Dr. Zakira Hekmat of Afghanistan. Dr. Zakira Hekmat founded the Afghan Refugee Solidarity Association in Turkey in 2014, where she has since worked tirelessly to advocate for the rights of all refugees and women. Thanks to Dr. Hekmat's efforts, many Afghans, especially women, girls, and minorities, have received access to refugee protection and asylum, especially since the fall of Kabul to the Taliban in 2021. You're very welcome, Zakira. Next, I would like to introduce you to Ms. Alba Rueda of Argentina. Ms. Rueda is Argentina's Special Envoy for sexual orientation and gender identity in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Trade and Worship, and was the first Argentine Undersecretary for Diversity Policies in the newly created Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity. Her hope is to establish an LGBTQI plus foreign policy agenda and mainstream it into multilateral fora and bilateral relations, as well as represent the Global South. You're very welcome, Alba. Now I would like to introduce you to Doris Rios of Costa Rica. She is a recognized Cabecar indigenous leader and well-respected member of the China Quichua indigenous community. As a member of the National Women's Indigenous Forum, Ms. Rios advocated for the participation of women in issues of security, sustainable development, peaceful defense of human rights, and the recovering of indigenous lands. You're very welcome, Doris. Thank you. Okay, you will find more information about each of our panelists on the State Department's website. That was just a very, very, very brief introduction for everybody. So I'm now going to hand over to our panelists and our students to begin our conversation. And just to let you know, we're expecting this first portion of the conversation to last approximately an hour. And then we're going to open up for questions from all of you. So we look forward to hearing your questions in due course. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Graham, for that wonderful introduction. It has been an amazing interaction that we had before this session, and to hear so many languages, yet it is not a barrier today. And we are here to celebrate that with this wonderful women we have here with us. Dr. Hikmat, she has her own journey where she had been abandoned from her middle school and her journey as a refugee, how she is building. And today she's a doctor working towards many women and children's and girl-child upliftment who are refugees who come from Afghanistan. My question to her is, if you could share with us the journey that led you to advocate for refugees and how your work has evolved to address the changing needs of displaced communities. As an International Women of Courage Award winner, what has been the most significant impact of receiving this award on your work and advocacy program?
First of all, I would like to say my salams and greetings to all of you. I'm very happy that I'm amongst you today in George Washington University, in all of the my colleagues and other friends that they have gathered here together. I would like to thank you very much. I am Zakaria Hikmat from Afghanistan. I came to Turkey, and after that one, I started working for the refugees. The most important reason, when I was in Afghanistan, when I was in primary education in 6th grade, because of the restrictions that were imposed by the Taliban, I wasn't able to go to the secondary education. So when the first reign of Taliban came to Afghanistan, they said that girls and women, because they are girls and women, they cannot go to school. And I was really, for me as a very high ranking in 1st grade. In my class, it was not acceptable to sit in house. It was very painful for me, and also for my other friends, it was very much painful. So I decided not to stop. So I started secretly finishing my studies and my education, and with the help of my family and my teachers, we secretly studied. and that it wasn't like a short period of time. It was a long time, a very dangerous long time, because if the Taliban knew that we were studying there, they would probably kill our family and even my classmates and my friends. But we decided to, uh, but we had to finish regardless of what that we saw. So what I experienced personally first, and I felt it profoundly within my heart until 9/11, September 11, what happened. And of course, situations in Afghanistan changed, in that those that they really lost their lives back, and at that time that they lost their lives, a number of victims, they lost their lives. As a young girl back then, I remember that saddened me deeply. That may God bless their souls, and that because what happened when then the United States came and the international coalition, NATO came to Afghanistan, all the international community came to Afghanistan, that a door was open to us, and because we were like prisoners, it was not, we didn't have any humanitarian rank. So in 2001, I was really a young girl, and I didn't have any hopes for future. I really didn't know what future might look like. So what will happen to me? But when the doors were open, then we were able to come to schools. And then when I went to school, so they took a test from me, and then from the 6th grade I went to 9th grade. They promoted me to 9th grade, and then so officially I started my 9th grade in my school, because there was limitations in teachers, because that nobody really graduated. No girls was graduated from the school, and we didn't have any female students in the colleges, so there was really no teachers. So this was really a pain, a suffering that every single woman and girl really faced this one and experience. And so, unfortunately, we are still experiencing something like this now. So at that time, when I was in high school, I was a student, and in the afternoon, even for the lower ranking classes that I was teaching, in a way that was also a teacher at that time. And then when I was in the 12th grade, so a lot of I was looking for some scholarships for abroad, and then I received from the United States for to get a scholarship for to be a pilot. But then also got another scholarship from Turkey, and then I selected Turkey, and then all by myself. When I was 18 years old, I came to Turkey. I even didn't know the language, the Turkish language. But when I came, I had a dormitory, of course, and I have a place. I had a college, and I known of a place that I needed to study the language. But because I didn't know the language, it was very difficult for me just to introduce myself, to become part of the society. But then after a year, when I learned the language, and then I got accepted in college and the medical school, I was in the first medical school that I saw a lot of refugees. When all the challenges that I witnessed both in Afghanistan and Turkish, they really the main cause of my work and effort, that I decided to work for these refugees. And so when I was in the first year of medical school, most of my friends and my colleagues, friends, they say that what are you doing really, that because what are you doing, because the medical school is by itself is a very challenging and difficult school. So even that during the 10 minutes of a break that we had, I wanted to do just interpretation through the telephone to helping some doctors and some nurses, so that they say that at least go and take a break, have a cup of tea or something like that. But I said no, because I needed even take advantage of 10 minutes just to help. but so I did some translation, interpretation, and then I had like a class at my home, homeschooling of language in my home, because I was a displaced myself. I knew, as I said, the sufferings. I wasn't able to study back home, so that's why that helped me to help my other friends, other women, other people. And I'm proud of my work that now they are using all these programs and activities that I've made. And I know that this award that I've received, it is a symbol. It's about for the new future generations. And as I'm not only, I've not worked only for the immigrants, not only for the refugees, for the Afghans, but in 2014, officially, we established an association that this association in 62 cities of Turkey is working. In 60 volunteers are working in this association, in this foundation, and then most of them are immigrants that they go to work during daytime, and then they sometimes they volunteer their times and they are helping other people. That in 2021, August 2021, that dark period of time when I was a girl, and then again happened, unfortunately, and Taliban again came back and they took power over Afghanistan. So when the Taliban, they came first, the people around the world thought that maybe they have changed. Now they have recognized now that the Taliban claim. They thought that, well, they have learned language, they have traveled abroad. Maybe now they are changing their policies. But unfortunately, from the first days and their interviews and their conversations, they said, no, we saw that they had not been changed. Yeah, and so that all the girls that we said that we told the truth, because the Taliban, the first thing that they did, they closed the Ministry of Women's Affairs in Afghanistan. And right now they have passed 24 laws that they are all against the human rights and against the children's rights and against the women's rights. So now, even during that time that I had the right to go to a school from the elementary school, but now even from the first grade, no one can go. We have seen a lot of violations, domestic violence, a lot of sufferings that they have been forced to with forced marriages, people that they actually they sold their children because of hunger and poverty, because of the poor conditions and situations, and sometimes even some of the young girls that they have been with the military officials of the Taliban. So these are the issues that we don't want the world to not to know about them. So we shouldn't, like as a girl, as a woman, should sit silent because of the forced marriages, early marriages, that these are two crimes that are taking place in Afghanistan. So because these families don't see another way of providing sustenance for themselves. So all these things, those are the situations that force me just to bring some changes, to voice out their voices of these Afghan women and Afghan people that they are in even Afghanistan. In the past a month or so, that I've talked with a lot of televisions, and as I said, I've raised their voices. Hopefully this award will be a voice. There would be something that in the future for them. Thank you very much. تشکر دکتر حکمت. میشنوم؟ صدای من میشنوید؟ دست بلند کن چی جان به انگلیسی.
Okay, Ms. Rios, thank you for being here and congratulations once again. My question is, from your past experiences serving on both the National Indigenous Roundtable of Costa Rica and the National Women's Indigenous Forum, can you tell us more about your background working for the rights of Indigenous women and communities and its importance to the international community?
Muy buenas noches. Es un placer.
Thank you very much. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to spend time with you and to talk about the processes, specifically in my case in Costa Rica. Indeed, I am part of an organization that is known as the National Women's Indigenous Forum in Costa Rica. This includes 24 territories in Costa Rica. 2 women per territory are part of that. It is a forum that has existed for over 20 years, and I have been in it now for several years, and I have a number of people that I've been working with in that capacity again for some time now. Now, how is it that I came to form part of the National Women's Indigenous Forum of Costa Rica? Well, I come from an indigenous community that at the time was beginning to get its land back after it had been stripped of it. We had lost our land as a result of a decree, and I came from a family of very scarce resources, a very numerous family, many, many siblings. And we had extraordinarily challenging circumstances in my family. And one of these sets of circumstances that I saw was the long distances that we had to walk to be able to get to school, and the lack of fruitful activities afterwards. And this led a lot of people, both men and women, to fall into a number of different vices, including the excessive consumption of alcohol. And so we, in 2001, were able to get our land back. But even with that change, it was just really nothing more than window dressing. The Chinakita, in theory, had its land back, but it really didn't. And the fact is that even then, we had to emigrate because the land, in fact, had already been taken over by other people, non-indigenous peoples, by large business communities, people who were very wealthy and had a lot of political and economic influence. And so even though we were on paper the landowners, we couldn't inhabit our own lands because these other people were already occupying it. Now, at this point, I had not finished my education. I hadn't even finished elementary school. But I decided that the path forward was through empowerment, and that it was only through that I would be able to talk about how to ensure that our community was able to take the leadership in decision-making for our community. It was a huge challenge. There were a lot of social challenges because I come from an indigenous group, because I did not have much formal education. This also was a challenge. But in this forum, I met with others, and there's a national institution with the acronym INAMU that works with women at risk. And they worked and helped us to come together to create this forum, and all of us from the different territories came together for 3 days to set an agenda to identify the priority issues in each area. That's how we got started. Then we started meeting with the local authorities and national authorities in health education, in housing, all of the different institutions in the government, seeking out solutions, because it was incredibly important that women's indigenous rights and that our voices be heard. In Costa Rica, there is no public policy that is based on indigenous people's cosmovision. And so seeking to integrate that into the national policy, seeking to mainstream the cosmovision, has been incredibly challenging. Very often, people who meant very well would come and bring things or impose policies that they thought were in our best interest, but turned out not to be, or simply were not. And so as we worked, we were able to lift up our voices and ensure that we would be heard. We were also able to get better women's health, to get our pap smears and other types of basic tests and health that would be provided to us that previously was not. We've been able to get our education and to have our educational institutions and have them in our lands. But going back to the question of land, again, we had this huge conflict. We had this huge issue over land ownership and control over that land. And that also meant that because we didn't control our own territory, we weren't able to even build our own schools. We could not build our own medical facilities. We could not find a place to teach our own language because we did not have access to our own territory. And so all of this fell to us as women to continue to share and to hand down the generations this oral tradition. And while that is worthwhile and important, we nonetheless, in 2018, decided to stage sit-ins at the community level because there is a national law and also ILO 169, the convention and other international agreements that we could turn to safeguard our rights and help to ensure respect for them. And so when we as Indigenous people talk about rights, the most basic right to us is to territory, it is to our land. And that is what led me, and not just me, but others as well, to fight this fight. I'm not just speaking again for myself, but other women as well. And it was a risk. We were threatened. In my case, I was walking in the middle of my community and a car crossed in front of me, cut me off, and people jumped out and told me that I was at risk and that they could harm me anytime they wanted. And other of my fellow human rights defenders, the other women, were threatened in different ways, including being threatened with rape. But I'm one of those people who believes that in conflict there must be dialogue. And not everyone always agreed with me on that. My community had decided to stand up and resist, but resistance without a search for solutions, particularly for women and girls, doesn't make any sense. And, men tend to think that resistance is the end in and of itself, but as women, we're looking for peace, tranquility, and for our children and for our families. And so we decided that we did want to sit down with the government. We did want to sit down and find solutions, because resistance and resisting for resistance sake is senseless. We needed to find solutions. And I was really in a tough spot, to be honest, because here we were, the women demanding solutions, and then the pressure of the men who were saying that the women were really too girly and didn't know what we were doing, and that we were just big crybabies. And so We said if we are going to resist and if we're going to continue to suffer, then this whole fight is pointless. That was our attitude. And in Costa Rica, of course, as I'm sure you know, nationally, internationally, is held in tremendously high esteem. It's a country that is well regarded and well known for respecting human rights, and everything is good and happy. And perhaps we don't have the conflict that we have or the violence that we're seeing in other countries and the warfaring and so forth, but there is violence, not just against indigenous people, but also against our Afro-descendant and our trans populations. And it's hard for people to get people to see these levels of violence when your country is upheld as a pillar of democracy and of respect for everyone's rights. You know, Costa Rica doesn't even have an army, and yet we have violence. Thank you very much.
Señora Alba Rueda, it is an honor
جای بسیار خوشبختی است که امرای خانمایی مثل شما
woman to ever occupy a high position in government in Argentina. You have contributed to a number of policies that uplift and protect LGBTQI plus people, such as the Transgender Labor Quota Act, the Marriage Equality Act, and the Gender Identity Act. You also founded Mujeres Trans Argentina, a network of trans women that advocate for social justice for transgender people in Argentina. I could go on and on about all the wonderful things that you have done, but I would rather hear what you have to say. So please tell us a little bit about your work and why it's so important to Argentina and the international community.
Good afternoon, everyone, to each and all of you. Thank you very much for this introduction and for this invitation. I am tremendously pleased to be here this afternoon with you. I would also like to express our gratitude to the university for having us. I believe it is a unique opportunity to raise our voices in support of our communities. And that is indeed what we are doing here today, is to note the importance of having a true active participation of women in all their diversity in domestic and international fora at the multilateral and bilateral level. Because human rights is a platform that seeks to ensure and to validate the respect for these rights. One of the major topics that I have been able to work on, both as Undersecretary of Diversity Policies as well as my current post as an ambassador for LGBTQ plus people, and that is to be able to support the social policy agenda and the social advancement agenda. As a trans woman, it is important to carry forward and press forward an agenda to combat the discrimination that the LGBTQ plus community faces, but also to champion the struggles and the achievements that we've had as a community. This is not something that, it's not just an opportunity to highlight diversity, but also to look at a different set of values and to express appreciation for those individuals who very often fall below the radar. And so my role as Undersecretary of Diversity Policy was primarily to carry forward a policy or policy proposals in a country, Argentina, Latin America, that is going through so many topics that was perceived as a leader in LGBTIQ policies, including equal marriage in Latin America. Of course, Argentina was the first country to recognize and to pass in 2010 equal marriage legislation. We've also had a movement that has ensured the first law really for gender identity based on a specific content, which is respect for trans identity. That is to say that we are the ones who have identified or are entitled to identify our own identity and how the state and the government should interact with us. This was a watershed piece of legislation, and it's really a matter of self-determination as being one of the primary tools for human rights. And this is legislation that has been replicated around the globe. And it has inspired much legislation and has inspired active citizenship. The understanding that we at the grassroots level can make change and lead to change, and that change reflects our needs and our rights. And we can really change this patriarchy, this binomial understanding of gender, and to do away with this. And this is particularly true in the global south, the areas where we've seen so much colonization and this effort at decolonization. This is part and parcel of that, looking at the intersections and the intersectionality that we have between feminism, with racism, with social and economic classes, and how all of this interact with the LGBTIQ plus community, and how we see this hierarchy among genders that has evolved over time, and how we can really combat this. So we've had a historic opportunity to bring forward these public policies, and that was through the creation of a Ministry of Gender Diversity, which toward the end of 2019 was created in Argentina, and that is when I took on this role. And I've already spoken at length, but what I'd like to underscore perhaps is that the political agenda that we've adopted in the ministry has to do with focusing on a trans feminist perspective, and that it should be those of us who are living below the radar, below the line of privileges, that can have a voice and a vote and be more present on the political stage. Obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic hit us extremely hard. We had just created this ministry, and 3 months later, we had these tremendous restrictions in terms of movement and our lockdowns and so forth that were quite draconian in Argentina. And that really had, again, a tremendous impact on trans women and revealed the tremendous vulnerability of trans women in our country. And that has, of course, been the priority in the work that we've been doing, that has to do with, from this administration, with an effort to create a public policy that affects over 7,000 people that are receiving support, and trans people receiving, again, training and so forth for employment within the social sphere. That has been one of the most successful programs that we've had, job training that we did in 2020, even in the context of the pandemic. Argentina has made a huge step forward in a project or creating a piece of legislation that now requires that at least 1% of all public service jobs are reserved for trans individuals. And this is the trans quota law, and this is the is extremely important, this Transgender Labor Quota Act, that has meant that the public service institutions have to meet this 1% quota. And the fact is that it's incredibly important to make our presence more visible and being proactive in that regard. And that's not the only important act, not the only important piece of legislation or actions that are important in recognizing the social movements as the protagonists in these efforts. Lastly, I'd like to note that when I started working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Argentina, one of the priorities became putting a value not just in showing the development within an incredibly unequal set of circumstances. I mean, well, let's acknowledge first and foremost that our region is the most violent for trans women and the most unequal generally in the entire world. So we must acknowledge that we have assassination and murders of trans women. And in fact, the life expectancy of trans women is half that of other people. And so this gender identity, we are people who, because we are fighting for the recognition and the acknowledgement of our identity, it is unacceptable that we have this life expectancy that has been completely cut off, or is so brief and so short as compared to everyone else. And I want to note nonetheless that globally, we need to focus on the dialogue with other countries, whether it's North-South and South-South, to decriminalize our identity. And if those who are working on gender identity laws and those who are taking actions to strengthen their institutions, whether it's in healthcare or justice, there is so much to be done, not only in my own country, but still continuously around the globe. We need to engage in dialogue, to share lessons learned, best practices, and the successes. And in 2010, when our Equal Marriage Act was passed, the president at the time, was, of course, was a woman, and said that when we recognize all of society's rights, all of society moves forward. And I believe that this is a core message for the entire world. We need to have a regulatory framework that protects rights. And I think that that has undoubtedly been one of the underlying principles and the core facets that we've brought forward into the forefront in our foreign policy, not just at the bilateral level, but at a multilateral fora. When we're talking about human rights, it must be inclusive and we must be heard. Often we don't come into these fora on equal footing for economic reasons. We don't have the money to be able to undertake the actions that are needed. And so I think we need to change that focus and we need to make greater efforts. Men, women, transgender, everyone needs to work together to ensure that this world that faces so much inequality, that has so much war, so much conflict, we need to move beyond that. We need to work with our institutions, with our people to change these binary and traditional frameworks. Thank you very much.
We will now have 10 minutes for next set of questions because we would also want our audiences to ask questions to the speakers here. Dr. Hikmat, you've been doing a lot of work towards upliftment of Afghan refugee women and girls, which is significant and tremendous, and we can't thank you enough for that. My question is, what role do you see U.S. government playing, or any support that is required to ensure that these Afghan refugees, especially women and girls, can receive, so that they can receive adequate resources and assistance to rebuild their lives in the new community? And also, there are a lot of aspiring young women in GW who go through a lot of challenges and obstacles, but they want to make difference in their communities. What is your message to them?
Thank you very much. تشکر میکنم از سوالش.
Thank you very much for your question. Recently, unfortunately, we are witnessing that the situation in Afghanistan is very tragic, and we are actually witnessing a crisis in refugee, not only inside Afghanistan, but also outside Afghanistan. In 2021, when the Taliban came back, the whole people were horrified. And you probably, I since seldom someone that probably saw that American airplane, and then, a lot of people said that because if he wanted to stay in Afghanistan and would be one of soldiers of Taliban, so he would rather go and sit on that plane and leave the country. And that was a tragedy around the world, as a matter of fact. And right, even now, the situation in Afghanistan is as such that no one can leave the home without a chaperone, with a male chaperone. Can you imagine that you're a young girl, you're a third year and junior in a college, and you're hoping and saying that I'm a young girl, and now you want to get your for master's degree or for your PhD, and then somebody comes to you and say, no, stop. You cannot go back to school. You cannot back to college, and just to sit home. That by itself, it's unimaginable, unthinkable. But we are now thinking, we are almost like getting into the 22nd century, but we are in the 13th century. So the lives of human beings are not really important. So that's why people, they need to flee to the neighboring countries such as Iran, Turkey, or Pakistan, because so situations, as I said, is very bad. It's very tragic. So the international community is our wish and our desire as a woman, and for millions of Afghan women that they have been set aside and marginalized and sitting at home, that so the international community now has been almost a year and a half, they are being tested, that whether they are working for the women's rights, about freedom of expression, freedom of movements, everything. But so far, nothing has happened. So we can see that the United Nations and some other countries, particularly the United government of the United States, that they should be more proactive, working more. They need to put pressure on this group, and it is not really important that who is governing the country, even if it isn't the Taliban, but it has to be like as a citizen of the Afghan, that everybody has to have equal right. Women needs to be recognized as human beings. They should have right because they are half of the society. And when a woman, we have an illiterate girl, when we have, then that will be a illiterate mother will not be able to educate her children. I'm not saying that all mothers are illiterate, but of course there is a difference between a woman that is literate or illiterate. So we want to have a better generation, a more educated generation. For the past more 20 years, that when the United States was in Afghanistan, I can give myself as an example. For example, I became a doctor. Now I'm working for a lot of refugees. I'm just only one example, but there are so many girls that they have become successful, and they are really good role models. But unfortunately, after the fall of the Taliban and the reign of Taliban and fall of Kabul, so the process of the refugees in a way was stopped, and so that those people that they fled the Taliban's regime, so some of them very much it's difficult for them to to be registered again. So actually registration has been stopped. If someone comes illegally to another country, they ask for their identification card, and if they don't have any medical card, they cannot receive any services. Educational, health services, any kind of services or livelihood that you can think of, for the condition of a human being, they will not be supported by, or they will not be able to get those benefits. And we are witnessing those people that they have been, that since for the past 13, 14 years, still they don't have any, the situation is such, they are not in a place. They are like displaced people wandering around. So those people, except those that have come from Syria and from the government of Turkey, that they have cases, but the other refugees, they need to leave. We have LGBTQI that they need to go back to Afghanistan or go back to Iran. We have women activists, women that if they want to go back to Afghanistan or Iran, then unfortunately they will be tortured, or they will be, their rights will be violated. I'm thanking for the government of Turkey, because a lot of the refugees that they have come to Turkey, but the United States of America is the country that has the more quotas for the refugees. But my request is that I'm hoping that those countries that are in Indonesia, or Turkey, or Iran, that they have not been neglected, or they have been forgotten. They need to review their policies, the government of the U.S. And if it is possible for them, that they need to cooperate and contribute with them. Another request that I'd like to come, because I know because of time limitation, I don't want to take much of your time, but the most important, first and foremost important, the thing is the doors of the schools need to be open in the face of the Afghan girls. So this is for all the European countries and the United States. That will probably create a big, dangerous problem, because in the past 20 years, as I said, that in Afghanistan, that there were good improvements came into surface, and a lot of women, they got a lot of awareness. They don't want to silence their voices, but rather, even though that their voices, they have been silent, but deep down, they want to voice out their request. They want to raise their voice. And that's why it is very important that they need to take serious action, so that the doors of schools get open, because it is not beneficial from all aspects, whether it is religious views, whether it is the national views. It is a God-given natural right of a person to go to and seek education. So my suggestions for the students that are here at GW, it is, as a girl, as a woman, we have to give hands and hands together, stand shoulder to shoulder. Like a problem, if one of our sisters is having a problem in Iran, like Misa Hamini in Iran, we have thousands of those girls like Amini in Afghanistan, those girls that they have been tortured. And so we have to, all of us together, collectively raise our voices, so that cross cultures, cross countries, we should think like globally. In Turkey, the condition is different, because all those refugees and asylum seekers, they don't have any life there. In a way, for future destiny is very much unknown for them. But in the United States of America, conditions are different. Maybe that's why the immigrations or refugees is not that much of a big deal, but those refugees and those immigrants that they are in the Middle East or in the Southeastern Asian countries and other countries, they are living in a very poor conditions and situations. So the quotation that we had during the President Trump's time was limited. Hopefully that the quota and the number would be increased and it will improve. Thank you very much again for your time and attention.
As the International Women of Courage Award is presented by the U.S. Department of State, what can the U.S. government do, whether it be diplomacy, aid, or anything else, to help your cause in Costa Rica? And as well, with there being many students, professors, and fellow academics here tonight, what can all of us do to support and get involved with Indigenous rights in Costa Rica?
Bueno, qué
That is a great question because the situation is really complex. Only with the recognition given by the United States government alone is a great step. I didn't know until I got here when I met my fellow awardees about it, because I used to hear from the United States through the news and from them through the news, but listening directly from them it has had a great impact on me. The fact that my country does not recognize our rights is a very big problem. This award opens up a platform to the world so that the world can hear us, so that the world can see that human rights are being violated in my country. There is violence against women, and it is an illness that is killing society currently. We need to create a joint agenda at the world level that could make realities, make women's participation a reality. It's difficult to say how you could help because around the world, all women suffer from violence. I know it is not only my indigenous community that is affected, that is being killed for raising their voices. It is at the Latin American level too. People that are defending environment, access to their lands, that are being punished in their own countries for doing these things. We have many activists in Latin America that have been killed. As I said, this award has been amazing. What could the United States do? They could maybe help civil organizations more. They could support them in their defense for human rights. Because sometimes institutions have a lot of bureaucracy and they follow the rules of the government at that time, and sometimes the government does not want to defend rights. The United States needs to make sure that rights are being defended in Latin America. It breaks my heart to hear my colleagues from Ukraine, from Dr. Hamad, all of their stories. It's really difficult to say what you could do, because we would like to have those answers. We would love to stop seeing so much violence in our countries. I just want to take this opportunity to thank the government of the United States for these awards. In my case, it gives us visibility. I can talk about the process of the indigenous communities in Costa Rica, and it gives inspiration to the current leaders that are working hard to defend their rights. We can speak about our problems or our needs and the violence that we suffer in this platform, and this is a great opportunity. I work in an organization that has been wonderful for my personal life. We have done wonderful work in this organization. We have have processes with indigenous worldview and women's view. I love your question. And I would like to say again that I am aware that there is a lot of work to do. My country is suffering a lot. We're suffering a lot also from the media when they talk about these topics. But it is great to have the media now talking about me having received an award, an indigenous woman receiving an award. This is wonderful. Talking about Costa Rica. And they realize that they need to do something because all of our problems are being seen at the international level. Thank you.
This is our final question before we start with the audience Q&A. And like my student colleagues, I would like to ask you, even though thanks to the work of people like you, Argentina has developed great policies to protect queer people, your country and mine and every country in the world still has a long way to go until we achieve equality. So how can the international community work collaboratively to help advance this cause? And how can all of us in this room and watching online, students, activists, academics, do to help queer people in Argentina?
Thank you. I believe that in order to have a basic participation, we need to be able to change our focus, the focus on our communities and the value of our words. I would try to talk about this, and I tried to say this in my answer before, but I believe that in all of the progress that we have had globally in terms of decriminalization and recognition of rights, I also believe that we have great challenges nowadays in multilateral spaces, in the representation of countries, in the voices of countries. You know that the anti-gender movement has gotten stronger around the world. And we can talk about the development in first world countries in Europe of anti-gender and anti-trans movements. I believe that if we translate this into the Latin American realities, it also happens in the academic fields, but also in religious fundamentalist spaces. There is a lot of lobbying for LGBTQI plus community, for them not to have their rights recognized. We have been seen as enemies of the extreme right movements around the world, and they are directly attacking us. They are directly attacking LGBTQI plus people, the way we look, the way we do things, and this has happened to me too. And we need to make greater efforts to continue giving visibility to a complex agenda and visibility, and that when we are present, like in this platform, in this award that we're receiving, this recognition has great value. Having affirmative actions could be translated into foreign policies as well. I believe this is a step forward. This is a positive message to the world, meaning there are intersections of women that describe us from territories, class, ethnicities, in the patriarchal and binary worlds where we have taken part, and many women take part. And in that feminist platform, the platform of women and women's rights, we need to be active to bring about changes. And I think that is one of the important steps. And then I should say that the attacks of the extreme right parties and of the government that is creating enemies in the LGBTQI plus community and fundamentalist religious communities that have conversion therapies and modified the gender identity of people or their sexual orientation, or all of the attacks that we suffer from on the streets in countries where we didn't expect, or countries that respected our rights. What we should do regarding all this is go to the international community. There are fundamental roles, like the one this university has. They can talk about inequality, the inequality that LGBTQI plus community suffers from. And we can have specific examples and scientific evidence of how this inequality impacts us and how not having our rights recognized impacts our communities. I believe that it's important to talk about academic and scientific studies, because the idea of the scientific studies in the world has been taken to talk about how natural it is to have a binary position, to be heterosexist, all these natural roles of women in society, of where we should be and what our destination is, if we need to be at home or if trans women need to be working on the streets as sex workers. And we need to talk about this in spaces where we can have discussions, and at the international level and in academic spaces. And I believe that the international community needs to have active roles and fight against inequality, and this is fundamental. The question is, what do we do with all this inequality? Well, having actions, taking steps. Every time that we have had the opportunity, my colleagues and I, all of my colleagues who have received this award, we have been able to be at the international stage and talk about the inequalities and how it has affected our lives and how bad it is when our rights are not recognized. We need to get the attention of the international community so they can act on it. I believe that our entire society needs to work to modify our societies. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you so much to our panelists for such wonderful answers and insight. I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions, Dr. Graham? Yeah? All right. Please raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. We have students somewhere that are going to be giving people mics. Do I see the mics? This one. Okay. So if you'd like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we will get that mic to you. We have one over here on the right.
Buenas noches con todos.
Good evening. My name is Andrea Soria, and I am very thankful for being here today with us. Thank you for sharing your experiences with us. I would like to ask my question to Leader Doris Rios. I would like to ask you your opinion on how development projects can be adapted to the good living philosophy that is so important for the Quebecer communities in Costa Rica. Thank you.
Por cierto,
Thank you for the question. The organization that I belong to, of course, our national roundtable, the Mesa Nacional, does focus on buen vivir, on living well. And of course, based on our communities and from our communities, we have an understanding of how our work should progress. The concept of good living, of buen vivir, means for us access to our land, because for our community, it is the source of life. And so, not just of the Kavekar people, but for all of us, that is this communication, this relationship with Mother Earth, with nature. Because we look at Mother Earth as something that is not there to be extracted from, but it is the source of our foodstuff, of our medicine. It is where we can sit and transmit our ancestral knowledge to young people and receive it from our elders, where the water has a meaning, where the wind has meaning. How can development take place from the outside? Well, only by building together, by ensuring that those who come in from the outside do so with an attitude of respect for our voices, our vision, so that we are positively, not negatively affected. I don't know if that answers the question.
All right, we have time for one more question. If you could raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question. Over here on the left.
Thank you so much, everybody. You are three incredibly inspiring leaders in your community, and it's such a privilege to hear from you and have you associated with the United States through this award. This is a question for Dr. Hekmat and Alba. Can you speak to the importance of mental health in displaced communities and in the LGBTQI+ community? How important is it to invest in mental health frameworks? And can you provide some insights on what your recommendations would be to ensure that the mental health of displaced or LGBTQI+ people is prioritized? Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to refer to the biggest paradigms of the LGBTIQ movement, which is to react to the creation of or belief that our reality is a choice or is a pathology. Very often, we've been treated medically and surgically, psychiatrically, seeking to delay or reverse our adoption of identity or our equality. Now, I'm going to link your question to what is happening to girls, children, trans and non-binary boys and girls today. Because I think today that is where we are seeing this paradigm of the creation of a pathology around our reality continuing to emerge. I spoke a moment ago about conversion therapy. And this is not just a quote unquote mental health issue, but also in the spaces of religious fundamentalism, where there is an effort to change who we are, and that impedes us, keeps us from developing ourselves within the context of our own true identities. The development of our identity, when we are unable to express who we are, how we feel, is truly, I think, at the core of the issue and the crux of the problem, not just of an adult-centric, but also anthropologically centric vision, anthrocentric vision, and the understanding not only of all children, but particularly of LGBTQI plus individuals. Very often, our position is made more relative vis-a-vis other cis children. When a boy says, I'm a boy, when a girl says, I'm a girl, no one questions it. But when a young person says, I'm such and such, if they're not biologically associated with that, everyone questions it and tries to understand and send them straight to the psychiatrist to see why there's this quote unquote anomaly. And so this pathology, this pathologization, to coin the term, is tremendously harmful, and therefore we need to focus our mental health efforts on young boys and girls and in adolescents, because the harm that is created in terms of this messaging at that age is tremendous. The suicide rate and the self-harm rate among LGBTQI people and the abusive rate of people, or the levels of abuse of people seeking to quote unquote correct our sexual tendencies or preferences or realities is horrific. And it's important that government and academia do more research on this as well, to really bring to the forefront the horrors of these tremendous pressures. Again, looking at the rights of young boys and girls and trans individuals, people who need to identify as who they are without a label assigned to them. Thank you.
میدانم وقت ما خیلی کمه به خاطر من خیلی خلاصه جواب میدم.
I know our time is very limited, but I would like to answer briefly. I know as the questions, when a person is vulnerable during a war, who loses the family members, who loses a friend, and then that definitely that would put a lot of effect on mental health, and so that is that person has probably been a internally displaced person, and then as a refugee or an immigrant, he goes to, because illegally they go to a different they cross the border, so that the person that they want to go, but the people that they get bribery and money when they, for example, when they go to Turkey, when some other countries, when they come in Turkey, and even in Turkey, a lot of discriminations are being committed against them. They cannot find job. So that is a part of psychological impact of it. It is a lot. So for example, imagine a student, like someone is a professor of college and someone is that, and now when she goes to Turkey, then she sits home. And that will put a lot of impact on the psychological impact. Myself, we had some difficulties and issues. I've seen a lot of people, and then so there is a person that doesn't even cannot go to and refer to a clinic because they are not legally bound. They cannot even go back to their home country. So my association and my foundation is trying individually to help these people to some of the diseases that are very acute, that I send them prescription and I send them medicine. Send more than 160 women that they were pregnant women, and I talked with the government of Turkey, and they give them kind of clinical services for them. So at least through those that they will all get some kind of professional mental health recovery. In my foundation, we have a psychologist in our foundation. And then one of the psychologists that in the United States, that when I go back to that in the United States, is 3 months ago, that she sent me a letter and saying that voluntarily I would like to work with you through online. Then I would like to give therapies and psychotherapy to these people. So one of my requests is that those people that are here tonight, and they speak English, so through the online we would like to have training language classes where they want to give that psychological therapy. So we need all kinds of help and all kinds of services. Thank you very much.
Ahora sí. Okay. Thank you very much. As Dr. Graham said, I'm the director of the Global Women's Institute at George Washington University, which is a university-wide institute. We work very closely with Dr. Graham and the Elliott School Gender Equality Initiative in International Affairs. Is it close enough? And we particularly do a lot of research and advocacy around violence against women, and particularly research in conflict areas. So if you're interested in our work, I invite you to look at our website. We also have an international program in gender and development that called Gender Pro that you might be interested in. Thank you so much for inviting me to give closing remarks. And thank you so much to the Department of State for bringing these amazing women here. It's been such an inspiration. We just, at the Global Women's Institute, we just celebrated our 10th anniversary yesterday. And we created also an award that we called Champions for Justice. And just yesterday, we honored three groups of women, Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, who is the head of the Progressive Congress in the Progressive Caucus in the United States House of Representatives. Also Brisa de Angulo, who is a Bolivian activist for the rights of children and survivors of sexual abuse. And then the prize that we were most excited about was the 33 Nicaraguan women ex-prisoners who were just came out of jail 1 month ago yesterday, were sent on a plane to the United States with 200 men. It was 222 altogether. While they were on the plane, they were stripped of their rights and their nationality. Their names were erased from the civil registry, so their children no longer have parents and they can't get birth certificates or passports. And now they're stateless and homeless with no support at all and living really just on the solidarity of friends and individuals. I actually have the honor of having 3 of the women hosting them in my house right now. And I've been able to experience firsthand the enormous trauma that it means to be not only to have been incarcerated for years, many in solitary confinement, in the dark, and now to be separated from their families with no possibility of seeing them and really no sense of how they're going to make their lives going forward. So I'd like to add them to the list of women of courage together with these women who are being honored today. I'm just remembering also, it reminds me that it was just a few years ago that right here we had a Nicaraguan woman, Amaya Copens, who had just been released from Nicaraguan prison then. At that time, this is a whole new batch of women prisoners. And I'm sure many of you were there and were incredibly inspired by her words. I'm so glad that the Women of Courage Award exists, because the role of women human rights defenders in the world is so vital and so critical and so often goes unrecognized. Women human rights defenders are the drivers of democracy in the world. And as we heard from Sakira, right now, there is an unprecedented backlash and sort of wave of authoritarianism in the world, and in particularly against women's rights. And I include the United States in that. Women are right now suffering unprecedented attacks against their sexual and reproductive freedom. LGBTQ plus people, and particularly trans individuals, are suffering unprecedented attacks. So this is not, when we listen to the amazing stories of these women here, we shouldn't just be thinking, oh my God, that's amazing. You know, they live in these horrible places where horrible things are happening to women. You know, aren't we lucky to live here? I think we need to remember that we also need to stand up for women, and particularly marginalized women in our own country. I'm not going to go much longer because we really are at the end here. One thing that I'd like to say, I'm so glad that the US government is honoring these women during this week. I would love it if our government continues to honor the work of women human rights defenders every day. We have some good steps going forward, such as the GBV strategy out of State Department, the new action plan on GBV, the national action plan. But we'd like to see it really made reality. There was a great GBV strategy that came out about 10 years ago, and not much came out of it, and not a lot of new money came out of it. So let's really hope that this one leads to much more commitment to gender equality and to women's rights, both in the United States, but also throughout all of our foreign assistance and foreign policy. It's probably too much to hope that we would get a feminist foreign policy the way they have in Sweden, but you know, one can always dream. And to end, I would just like to thank you again so much for coming here, for sharing your stories. We've been so inspired, and you are really not just women of courage, but champions for justice. And I salute you all. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all so much for coming. This is the end of our panel. And yeah, thank you all so much.